What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay, so, here we go. More Bible reading. Going with Exodus chapter 12 this time. And this one is a lot longer than the previous chapter, so expect a much longer video. And also a reduction in my commentary, just to not have the 51 verses of it go, like, too long. So let's hop right in. Last chapter was really just announcing the final plague upon Egypt of the firstborn sons dying. That has not actually happened yet. Pharaoh was just warned about it. So anyway, here we go, Exodus 12. While the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, the Lord gave the following instructions to Moses and Aaron. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. Announce to the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each family must choose a lamb or a young goat for a sacrifice, one animal for each household. If a family is too small to eat a whole animal, let them share with another family in the neighborhood. Divide the animal according to the size of each family and how much they can eat. The animal you select must be a 1-year-old male, either a sheep or a goat, with no defects. Okay, so this, believe it or not, is actually the first official introduction of, animal sacrifice to mark a certain regular occasion. And there will be more explained later on in the chapter as to why the animal sacrifice is an important part of it. But previously, there were just offerings of whatever kind made, just as people kind of giving thanks to God for, whatever fortune fell upon them. Or perhaps as, an announcement or commitment to a covenant or something like that. But those were all just like kind of one-time things. This one, it's saying, is going to be every year. Anyway, so something didn't quite make sense to me as I was just reading it at first with each family must choose a lamb or a young goat for a sacrifice. So, like, if one animal for each household. So if each household has to sacrifice an animal, but then you run into if a family's too small to eat a whole animal, let them share with another family. I guess maybe then the smaller families would actually possibly be sharing a bit with the bigger families. Because each household's sacrificing an animal, and if the whole household can't eat the animal, then, maybe another house that has more people in it who would possibly eat more than a single animal might get another part of them. I guess it's sort of a mutually agreed upon, hey, this is more than what I need. Does anyone need, what's left of what we have? Sort of like, when people just kind of say, hey, I've got this thing, I don't really need it anymore, and they try and either give it away to charity or maybe talk with somebody at church and say, hey, I have this, does anybody need it or want it? Anyway, and I'm already talking too much. This is going to be a stupidly long video if I keep going at that rate. All right, verse 6. Take special care of this chosen animal until the evening of the 14th day of this first month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel must slaughter their lamb or young goat at twilight. They are to take some of the blood and smear it on the sides and top of the door frames of the houses where they eat the animal. That same night they must roast the meat over a fire and eat it along with bitter salad greens and bread made without yeast. Do not eat any of the meat raw or boiled in water. The whole animal, including the head, legs, and internal organs, must be roasted over a fire. Do not leave any of it until the next morning. Burn whatever is not eaten before morning. So, just more details on the animal sacrifice and how it's going to be used, what it's going to be used for. And as the sort of section title suggests, this is the first Passover, and we'll get to why it's called Passover later. But this is a major feast, among all Jewish communities around the world. So this is like a yearly thing that happens. I hadn't really thought about the possibility that the whole blood smearing on the door frames was a yearly occurrence. Is it? Is it not? I know it's something they're doing this time, but is that happening every year? I mean, I guess, because these other instructions sound like they're part of the same whole annual thing. So, anyway. Verse 11. These are your instructions for eating this meal. Be fully dressed. Wear your sandals and carry your walking stick in your hand. Eat the meal with urgency, for this is the Lord's Passover. On that night, I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorposts will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. So again, in the context here, that makes sense as to why they would be, taking the lamb's blood and smearing it on the door frames. In terms of future years, it doesn't really seem to make as much sense. Because this is just a one-time plague thing happening, right? There's no other record of this happening further in the future than this particular event. And as to why this is called Passover, I mean, it's passing over because of the blood. So, there you go. What's the footnote here? Hebrew says, bind up your loins, instead of be fully dressed, I guess. Same general idea, I would assume, though. I mean, the point is, be ready to go. Because, especially in this particular occasion, they might very well be going shortly after this. And that's also part of the reason for just burning any leftovers and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, verse 14. This is a day to remember. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time. For 7 days the bread you eat must be made without yeast. On the first day of the festival, remove every trace of yeast from your homes. Anyone who eats bread made with yeast during the 7 days of the festival will be cut off from the community of Israel. On the first day of the festival, and again on the 7th day, all the people must observe an official day for holy assembly. No work of any kind may be done on these days except in the preparation of food. So there's a bit of a Sabbath idea going on here too with, resting. But in this case, it's twice within the whole week idea. So maybe, it says the first day and the 7th. I don't know. Maybe this is where we get the whole weekend idea from. I had never really thought about that before. Anyway, which that would make even more sense with our modern calendars. Calendars back then weren't quite like that, but then again, I mean, Did they even have calendars that much at all? Maybe not so much in physical forms. But, I mean, considering that a lot of people think of, even nowadays, you think of Sunday as the start of the week, Saturday is the end of the week, but usually the weekend breaks are Saturday and Sunday. That might also be part of the reason why in the Jewish calendar and the way they do things, it's usually more of a Friday, Saturday kind of thing. Because maybe their calendar was a little different with all this stuff going on. Anyway, verse 17. Celebrate this festival of unleavened bread, for it will remind you that I brought your forces out of the land of Egypt on this very day. This festival will be a permanent law for you. Celebrate this day from generation to generation. The bread you eat must be made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day of the first month until the evening of the 21st day of that month. During those 7 days there must be no trace of yeast in your homes. Anyone who eats anything made with yeast during this week will be cut off from the community of Israel. These regulations apply both to the foreigners living among you and to the native-born Israelites. During those days you must not eat anything made with yeast. Wherever you live, eat only bread made without yeast. Okay, so after the whole animal sacrifice and that kind of stuff, then comes the unleavened bread. So you've got on the 10th day of the month, okay, hold up. I'm trying to get the order of events here correct. So 10th day, family must choose a lamb for a sacrifice. Choose a lamb or young goat. So they choose the animal on the 10th day. And then I guess it's on the 14th day that the animal is actually sacrificed and eaten and all that kind of stuff. And that also then marks the start of the Festival of Unleavened Bread, which happens for the whole next following week. Anyway, I was just trying to make sense of the order of events there and how they lined up with each other. Because I'm like that. I think about these things from time to time. Anyway, verse 21. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel together and said to them, "Go pick out a lamb or a young goat for each of your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Drain the blood into a basin. Then take a bundle of hyssop branches and dip it into the blood. Brush the hyssop across the top and sides of the door frames of your houses. And no one may go through the door until morning. No one may go out through the door until morning. For the Lord will pass through the land to strike down the Egyptians. But when he sees the blood on the top and sides of the door frame, the Lord will pass over your home. He will not permit his death angel to enter your house and strike you down." So again, there's the explanation of the whole blood on the door frames and how that relates to what they're being asked to do and why it's called Passover and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, verse 24. "Remember, these instructions are a permanent law that you and your descendants must observe forever. When you enter the land that the Lord has promised to give you, you will continue to observe this ceremony. Then your children will ask, 'What does this ceremony mean?' And you will reply, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt. And though he struck the Egyptians, he spared our families.' When Moses had finished speaking, all the people bowed down to the ground and worshipped." So Moses was pretty much just relaying God's instructions to the rest of the Israelites. And again, there's the whole idea of this being something to remember and pass along throughout generations. Sometimes, there are events and occasions that maybe we could do with passing on a little bit better, even just regarding other ceremonies, religious or not. All right, verse 28. So the people of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded through Moses and Aaron. And that night, at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn son of the prisoner in the dungeon. Even the firstborn of their livestock were killed. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the people of Egypt woke up during the night, and loud wailing was heard throughout the land of Egypt. There was not a single house where someone had not died. So this is kind of talking about the events that were, what Pharaoh was warned about in chapter 11. This is now all that happening. And literally it happens just as it was described before. Really, the only difference in the description this time around is that it mentions the prisoner in the dungeon instead of like some, other servant girl or something like that. All right, and now we get to another little subsection header thing. Anyway, verse 31. Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron during the night. "Get out," he ordered. "Leave my people, and take the rest of the Israelites with you. Go and worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you said, and be gone. Go, but bless me as you leave." All the Egyptians urged the people of Israel to get out of the land as quickly as possible, for they thought, "We will all die." I guess maybe them not knowing what God would possibly do next were afraid, well, now that he's killing off our sons, who knows what's next? Who knows who's next? So let's get these people out of here. All right, verse 34. The Israelites took their bread dough before yeast was added. They wrapped their kneading boards in their cloaks and carried them on their shoulders. And the people of Israel did as Moses had instructed. They asked the Egyptians for clothing and articles of silver and gold. The Lord caused the Egyptians to look favorably on the Israelites, and they gave the Israelites whatever they asked for. So they stripped the Egyptians of their wealth. So it might not have been a plague, but I think this might have been kind of the final consequence, so to speak, of the Lord's wrath upon Egypt. Because all those previous plagues had taken a lot of their resources. But they might have still had, this jewelry and clothing and all these things that, kind of gave them monetary wealth still that they could have then used to, trade, barter, or whatever with other countries and be able to get some goods back more easily. But now God's taking that away too. So essentially, God is taking a whole lot of stuff, nearly everything away from Egypt through these plagues and all these events. And, he's giving the Egyptians all the more reason to remember what happened and sort of tremble in fear at the power of God. All right. Verse 37. That night, the people of Israel left Ramesses and started for Succoth. There were about 600,000 men, plus all the women and children. A rabble of non-Israelites went with them, along with great flocks and herds of livestock. For bread, they baked flat cakes from the dough without yeast they had brought from Egypt. It was made without yeast because the people were driven out of Egypt in such a hurry that they had no time to prepare the bread or other food. This is why there were the earlier instructions to, be ready to leave. eat urgently, no yeast in the bread, all that kind of stuff. Footnote about 600,000. Hebrew reads men on foot. Could possibly be interpreted as fighting men instead of just men. So there may have been even more people than what's suggested by this number, is the thing to be gleaned from that footnote. So you figure 600,000 men, even if you go for just an equal number of women and children to the number of men, that then leaves you with 1.8 million people. That's a lot of people. Back in those days, at least. I mean, 1.8 million isn't even like, the population of a major U.S. city these days, but, it's still, back then, the global population was not as large. Even so, quite a few people, and they had all been living in Egypt. Anyway, verse 40. The people of Israel had lived in Egypt for 430 years. In fact, it was on the last day of the 430th year that all the Lord's forces left the land. On this night, the Lord kept his promise to bring his people out of the land of Egypt. So this night belongs to him, and it must be commemorated every year by the Israelites, from generation to generation. So I think a lot of people, when talking about this, tend to just round that 430 down to a nice even 400, just for simplicity's sake. Also, it might have been mentioned earlier on that that something in this process might have happened at roughly the 400-year time frame. That wouldn't have been too far off from when Moses would have left Egypt in the first place to live in Midian. So, and I think there was some extra mention of that being, a moment when God paid special attention to the outcry from the Israelites over their slavery. Footnote, Samaritan Pentateuch reads, in Canaan and Egypt. Greek version reads, in Egypt and Canaan. But Canaan was where they had lived before Egypt. So, I don't know, maybe the land of Goshen was sort of on the border, so to speak, between those. Again, really wish I had a map that I could easily look at, but there's so many different maps to try and sort through and pull up for these. If you could find one, that might be helpful, and if you have further information because of that, let me know in a comment somewhere. But anyway, fact of the matter is, they'd been living in the area a long time. Even if not directly in Egypt, in the general area. So, verse 43. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, these are the instructions for the festival of Passover. No outsiders are allowed to eat the Passover meal, but any slave who has been purchased may eat it as if he had been circumcised. Temporary residents and hired servants may not eat it. Each Passover lamb must be eaten in one house. Do not carry any of its meat outside, and do not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate this Passover festival. Okay, so I guess this is separate. So the Passover is eating of the sacrificial lamb or goat or whatever, which is separate from the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They were kind of mentioned in quick succession earlier in the chapter, but So the Passover festival is the one with the lamb involved, and that is just for the people of Israel. Like, biologically, and, you know, those who are officially part of the community. Whereas the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it was mentioned, I think, that, you know, outsiders residing in the area were supposed to partake in that as well. Anyway, verse 48. If there are foreigners living among you who want to celebrate the Lord's Passover, let all their males be circumcised. Only then may they celebrate the Passover with you like any native-born Israelite. But no uncircumcised male may ever eat the Passover meal. This instruction applies to everyone, whether a native-born Israelite or a foreigner living among you. So all the people of Israel followed the Lord's commands to Moses and Aaron. On that very day, the Lord brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt like an army. So maybe the whole like an army thing is, you know, making a little bit more sense of the whole men on foot footnote, and that, I mean, they may have been ready for the worst, so to speak. And that's why they might have been deemed, you know, fighting men or men on foot like that. But also, I guess this distinction needed to be made regarding, you know, foreigners partaking or not partaking of the Passover because of, you know, a rabble of non-Israelites going with them. Anyway, so yeah, there's pretty much the backstory of some significant events on the Jewish calendar, within Jewish history, and the, you know, the what caused them to be, and also the results of the final plague of death upon Egypt. And the people are finally getting to leave. Yay! So, anyway, that does it for this chapter. It was way longer than the last chapter, but still, important things to take note of here. Okay, gonna do the short version of the outro because the chapter and thus the video was long. So, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Just look down in the description for info on finding my social media pages and engaging and interacting and all that good stuff. And, yeah, leave comments down below with any thoughts you have. So that's it. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next one. But until then, stay cool, people.